Hello. Thank you for watching the video till the end. My goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel. If you're interested in this type of content, please subscribe. I would be grateful to you. Let's move on to the story. Story 1: Tragedy on the California. Jonathan Marshall stood on the deck of the trading ship California and watched as New York faded on the horizon. The year 1857 was full of hope and expectations. At 32, Jonathan, a former farmer from Ohio, decided to try his hand at trading. He joined the crew of the California as the second mate. The ship was loaded with valuable cargo: silk, tea, and porcelain, which they planned to deliver to San Francisco. Also on board were Captain Robert Hayes, an experienced sailor with many years of service, and the first mate, Thomas Brown, a stern but fair man. The crew consisted of 10 more sailors, all of whom were strong and reliable guys. The first few days of the voyage went smoothly. The weather was clear, the wind was favorable, and the ship made good progress towards its goal. On the third week of the voyage, trouble began. The sky darkened, the wind picked up, and Captain Hayes ordered all the rigging secured and preparations made for a storm. The night was terrible. Waves rose to the sky, and the ship was tossed like a nutshell. Jonathan and the other crew members worked tirelessly to keep the ship on course and save the cargo. The storm lasted 3 days, and when it finally subsided, the California was seriously damaged. The main mast was broken, the sails torn, and the hold flooded. The crew was exhausted, but still hopeful. Captain Hayes ordered repairs to be made and the journey to continue, but the provisions and fresh water supplies were severely depleted. A few more days passed, and the situation worsened. The weather remained changeable, and the ship moved slowly. Rats appeared in the hold, eating the remaining supplies. The sailors became increasingly irritable, and conflicts began. Captain Hayes and Thomas Brown tried to maintain discipline, but it became more difficult. One morning, Jonathan woke up to screams. On the deck stood Captain Hayes, holding the ship's logbook. He accused one of the sailors, Bill Harris, of stealing supplies. Bill denied his guilt, but the captain was adamant. This caused a storm of indignation among the crew, and the situation quickly escalated. A fight broke out, in which the captain was fatally wounded. After Captain Hayes' death, the situation on board the California became critical. Thomas Brown tried to take command, but his authority was undermined. Jonathan tried to maintain order, but he lacked the experience and strength. Chaos reigned on board, and the ship drifted aimlessly. In the 6th week of the voyage, the supplies of provisions and water were completely exhausted. The crew began to die of hunger and thirst. Jonathan tried to support the remaining survivors, but his strength was waning. One day, a ship appeared on the horizon, a trading vessel that had spotted them and was heading to help. But it was too late. By the time the rescuers reached the California, Jonathan and a few other sailors were the only survivors. They were exhausted, dehydrated, and barely able to stand. The rescuers transferred them to their ship and provided assistance, but the physical and emotional wounds would remain with them forever. Story 2: The Disappearance of the El Dorado. Mary Smith was one of the few women on board the El Dorado, a passenger liner sailing from Boston to Liverpool in 1902. She was traveling to her husband, who worked in England. The liner was huge, luxurious, and full of passengers from different walks of life. Everything seemed perfect for this voyage. The weather was favorable, the crew experienced, and the passengers content. There were about 200 people on board, including the crew. Captain George Harper was proud of his ship and promised everyone a safe and fast journey. Mary enjoyed each day on board, making new acquaintances and admiring the views of the Atlantic Ocean. On the 3rd night of the voyage, Mary was awakened by a strange noise. It sounded like someone was scratching at her door. She got up and cautiously opened the door but saw no one. Deciding it was just her imagination, Mary went back to bed. However, the next day she noticed that several passengers looked worried. They talked about strange sounds and shadows, but no one could say for sure what was happening. Captain Harper tried to calm the passengers, explaining everything away as the wind and the ship's movement. But the oddities continued. At night, some saw strange lights on the deck, and one of the sailors went missing. The crew began to panic, and Captain Harper ordered increased watch. On the fifth night, the worst happened. Mary woke up again to noise. This time it was louder, as if someone was trying to break down the door. She heard screams and ran out into the corridor. There she saw Captain Harper and several crew members looking for something. Suddenly, the ship was rocked violently, and there was a deafening sound as if something had struck the hull. Passengers began to panic, and the captain ordered everyone to put on life jackets and prepare for evacuation. But it was too late. A massive wave hit the ship, sweeping everything in its path. Mary and a few others found themselves in the water. She clung to a piece of wood, trying to stay afloat. Around her were screams and chaos. The water was freezing, and her strength quickly ebbed. She watched as the El Dorado slowly sank into the abyss, taking with it all who hadn't managed to escape. By morning, Mary had somehow managed to hold on. She didn't know how much time had passed when a ship appeared on the horizon. It was a cargo steamer that had spotted them and was heading to help. Mary and the few survivors were rescued. They were taken to Liverpool, where they recounted what had happened. But the El Dorado and most of its passengers remained forever at the bottom of the ocean. The mystery of their disappearance was never solved, and the ship became one of many lost in the waters of the Atlantic. Mary returned home, but the memories of that terrible night haunted her for the rest of her life. Story 3: Successful Rescue on the San Francisco. Michael Johnson, an engineer from Chicago, decided to spend his vacation on board the cruise liner San Francisco, which was embarking on a tour of the Caribbean Sea. The year 1935 was a time of flourishing cruise tourism, and Michael wanted to enjoy a luxurious vacation. The liner was new, equipped with the latest technology, and promised an unforgettable journey. There were about 500 passengers and a crew of 200 on board. Captain Edward Wilson was an experienced sailor who had been at sea for over 30 years. The weather was perfect, and the cruise began with a celebration on the deck. On the fourth day of the voyage, while the San Francisco was in open sea, the weather suddenly changed. The sky clouded over, and a strong wind began to blow. Captain Wilson decided to deviate from the course and try to avoid the storm, but it soon became clear that the storm was upon them. The waves became enormous, and the ship started to rock violently. The passengers were frightened, but the crew acted cohesively and professionally. Michael, as an engineer, offered his help and was put in charge of checking the pumps and generators. The storm lasted 2 days, and all this time the crew and passengers fought for survival. The ship withstood the waves' blows, but one of the waves knocked out a porthole, and water began to flood the hold. The pumps were working at full capacity, but the water was coming in too quickly. Michael and several engineers tried to repair the damage, but the situation was worsening. Captain Wilson ordered everyone to put on life jackets and prepare for evacuation. Distress signals were sent out, and the crew began lowering the lifeboats. Despite the terrible conditions, the evacuation proceeded in an organized manner. Michael helped the passengers into the lifeboats and maintained order. A few hours after the evacuation began, a rescue ship appeared on the horizon, a Navy destroyer that had received the distress signal and rushed to help. Captain Wilson and the crew of the San Francisco managed to save most of the passengers. Michael was among the last to leave the liner. The rescue operation was successful, and all the survivors were brought ashore. The story of the San Francisco became famous for the courage and professionalism of the crew. Captain Wilson was awarded for his actions, and Michael Johnson, upon returning home, recounted his adventure to everyone. This story showed that even in the most challenging conditions, survival is possible through unity and selflessness.